Now we begin today's daf on Tzadi Beis with a statement of Rav Papa as to how Rava would test his students. Niske rechela bekama. He would ask them what were the nesachim for a rechela, which means a female sheep after it became older, past the 12-month period. Upshito lemas nisin. So Rav Papa says that he was amongst apparently the Talmidim that were tested by Rava, and he answered Rava's question based on a Mishnah in Shkolim. So a person took upon himself a neder to bring nesachim, and what he would do is instead of bringing from his house the flour, the oil, and the wine, he would rather pay the gizbar, and he would receive a ticket that was signed by the gizbar, which would allow him, and that ticket indicates that he had paid for the nesachim and for the soles, and then he would go over to one of the shofros, where they kept the monies of the tzibur, what's called the Trumas Halishka. He would present that ticket to the person who's in charge, and he would receive all the ingredients. And the Tanakama of that Mishnah in Shkolim states that there were actually 4 types of tickets that were used in the Mikdash, because the amounts of wine and flour used for Nesachim varies with the animal, and 3 of the tickets were used for the different Nesachim of a par, ayil, and a keves. The 4th was used for a Mitzorah who needed an additional lug of shemen besides the oil required for the 3 other animal offerings. Now, what did Rav Papa see in that Mishnah? It says in that Mishnah, Gedi Mishamesh Niskei Tzon. If he had this petek, this ticket or voucher as a proof of purpose for a Gedi, for a young goat, then it would serve for the nesachim of all tzon, meaning no matter what age it was. Shel gedolim, shel ketanim, shel zcharim, shel nekevos, because with regard to all tzon, it's the same exact amount, which we said was 3 isronos of flour and 6 lugim of oil and wine, with the exception of chutz mina elim, right? Because in the case of the elim, it was shlishas hahin, which was 4 lugim. And anyway, we see from the Mishnah that the Mishnah does not, but equates all the older sheep with the younger sheep, except for the case of an ayil, which is a male sheep. All right, now we get to our Mishnah for today. Kol karbonos hatzibur ein behem smicha. As a rule of thumb, a carbon tzibur does not require smicha. Smicha is like something that's usually for the individual. Chutz min apar haba al kol mitzvah. This is called a par heliv davar shel tzibur, when Bezdin issued an erroneous ruling that entails a violation of a chiyuv kares, and it was violated by most of the tzibur, and the Torah requires that a bull, a par, be brought, and that requires smicha. Now, exactly who's going to do the smicha when the erroneous psak was issued by the Sanhedrin? So perhaps the Zakanim would have to do the smicha. He gives an example where they ruled on a certain type of chelev that you're allowed to eat it. Most of the tzibur ate that chelev, and they have to and when they find out if it's an erroneous psak, and they violate a chiyuv kares, they bring a parahelim davashal tzibur. Okay, and now we have number two. The second exception of a korban tzibur that requires smicha is soyer hamishtalech. There were two seirim on Yom Kippurim. One was the soyer Hashem bifnim, and then there was the soyer lazazel bachutz. And the soyer mishtalech is called the soyer bachutz, and it requires smicha. And this is going to be the second korban tzibur that requires smicha. And there's halacha Moshe Sinai that two korbanos tzibur require smicha. One is hands down, uncontested. That's the parahelim davashal tzibur. And the other is going to be a subject of the machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. And now we're studying the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that the soyer mishtaleach requires a vidui for all of Klal Yisrael, for all their sins, including the Kohanim. So therefore, if the Kohen Gadol does smicha on the soyer mishtaleach, then he is the bailim of the karba because he is achieving kapar no less than anybody else. However, Rabbi Shimon Omer, he disagrees, and he holds that af soyer avodas kol chavim, meaning he's going to take out soyer mishtaleach because he's going to claim that the soyer mishtaleach is not mechaper equally for the Kohanim as it is for the rest of the members of Klal Yisrael. But now he's down from 2 to 1. He only has the power. Helim Dovashal Tzibur, he has to fill in a second korban tzibur that requires smicha, and he's going to replace the soyer mishtaleach with the soyer of avodas kol chavim, which means that if the tzibur accidentally, based on an erroneous ruling, violated idolatry, then they have to bring a separate soyer, and Rav Shimon holds that that soyer requires smicha, which is a little bit strange, as we'll see in the sugi, because the Kohanim did not violate idolatry. So why are they doing smicha? Anyway, all this we'll get to. Kol karbonos hayachid tunim smicha. The flip side is that a korban yachid requires smicha with 3 exceptions. Chutz min habechor hamaser pesach. They don't require smicha, even though it's a korban yachid. And I don't know, maybe that has something to do with the fact that there's no chet over here. I don't know. And then we have another exception, and that is hayorish. No, I'm sorry. Period. V'hayorish somech umevi nesachim umemer. The yoresh, again, we're not talking about a chatas here, but let's say we're talking about an ola, I would assume. And after let's call him Ruvain, pledged an ola, and then he died. Now it's inherited by Chanoch. Chanoch will bring the korban in place of his deceased father, with all the dinim as if he were the father. Smicha, nesachim, meimar, as he can effectuate tmura. Tan Rabbanan, we learned in the Brisa, kol korbanos tzibur ein behem smicha, chutz mi par haba al kol mitzvahs. That's the par helim davashal tzibur, and this is uncontested. That's explicit in the Torah. But now we get to a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. Seirei avodas kochavim divrei Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon says that the soyer that's brought for the communal violation of idolatry, b'shogeg, that carbon called a sa'ir of avodas kochavim requires smicha. Okay, next. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda holds that se'iri avodas kochavim ein bahem smicha. Now, I don't know what that means. Does that mean that there's no smicha at all? Or it means that it's not the smicha of the bailim, because the Kohen does the smicha and he is not guilty of violating avodas kochavim. So all this will come around the bend. But now, if Rabbi Yehuda takes out soyer avodas kochavim, he's got to substitute something else. As mi avi tachtem, what will I bring as a substitute? Soyer mishtalech, because according to Rabbi Yehuda, the soyer mishtalech is machaper even for the Kohanim. And insofar as the Kohanim are included in the kapar of the soyer lazazel, then when they do smicha, that is a smicha b'bailim. Of course, the Kohanim are no less bailim on the carbon than anyone else. Whereas Rabbi Shimon is of the opinion that the soyer mishtaleach, although for sure there is smicha implemented by the Kohen Gadol, but the Kohen Gadol is not, or any of the Kohanim are not achieving kapara, because they'll achieve kapara through the par of the Kohen Gadol, not through the soyer. So the Gemara asks, Lo sagya de lo ma'ayel. Why does Rabbi Yehuda feel compelled, after he nixes soyer of avodah zarah, to include soyer mishtaleach? And Omer Avina, because Gemiri, we have Allah Moshe Sinai that shtei smichos b'tzibur. There are two cases of carbon tzibur that require smicha, and once he removes once he removes the soyer avodas kochavim from the list, he's got to find something else to plug in, and therefore he found soyer hamishtaleh. Amalo Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon turns to Rabbi Yehuda, and he says the following: "V'lo ein smichel b'bailim v'zeh Aaron u'banav somchim bo." How can you tell me that the soyer mishtalech should be counted amongst the two karbanos tzibur that require smicha? After all, who's doing the smicha in the case of the soyer mishtalech? It's going to be Aaron, the Kohen Gadol, Ubanav Achrov, meaning the future Kohen Gedolim, and they are not miskaper from the soyer lazazel. Amalo, afzeh Aaron Ubanav miskaper. You're making a big mistake, Rabbi Shimon, because the truth of the matter is that the soyer mishtalech is mechaper not only for Klal Yisrael but also for the Kohanim. And therefore, this is called smicha b'bailim. Okay. Omar Rabbi Yirmiyah, you want to understand the machlokas here between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon? Azdu l'tamayu. We find it in a brisa. And the brisa is going to address the soyer lazazel. Tisani, we learn to the brisa. Now, we're not only addressing the soyer lazazel, but we're also talking now about Tumas Migdash V'Kadashov, which means if a person knew that he was Tameh, that he contracted Tumah, then he forgot about it, and then he went into the Migdash, or maybe a Kodshim, and he never found out about it. So there's a carbon Olav Yored. The keeper es Migdash HaKodesh. So we're talking about a Tameh who needs kapara because he entered into the Migdash. What does it mean, Migdash HaKodesh? Zeh lifnai v'lifnim. This Tameh entered into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. V'yes oil moed, zeh heichal, or the Tameh went into the heichal. Mizbeach kimashma'o, or the Tomei came in contact with the Mizbeach, and Yechaper Elu Hazaros, or he came into the Azor. Now, why does it say Azoros? Because there's what's called the Ezras Yisrael, and then there's the Ezras Kohen, like the first 11 Amos when you enter from the east into the Azor, that's called the Ezras Yisrael, where Yisrael is allowed to enter. Beyond that, he's not allowed to enter. Only Kohanim are allowed to enter. That's called the Ezras Kohen. So that's why he calls it Azoros in the plural over here. But in any event, we have now a pasuk that addresses the case of Yediyah B'tchila V'lo Yediyah B'sof, where he knew that he was Tomei at the very beginning, then he forgot it, and he never found out whether or not he was Tomei. So there's going to be some sort of a kapara through a carbon. And the pasuk goes on to say that the kapara for all these sins of entering into the Kodesh Kodashim, B'tumah, etc., down to the Azara, are achieved or is achieved by the Sarah Mishtaleh. And it says in the pasuk Kohanim. So the assumption here is that according to Rabbi Yehuda, the word Kohanim should be taken literally, telling us that the Sarah Mishtalech is mechaper for the Kohanim, and then the pasuk says, "I'll call Am HaKol El Yisrael." So the Kohanim and the rest of Klal Yisrael are included, whether it be Yisraelim or Leviim, Yechaper Leviim. Hushru kulam lekaparachas. The Sarah Mishtalech is mechaper for all Jews, Kohanim, Leviim, Yisraelim. Shemiskaprim b'Sarah Mishtalech divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Sarah Mishtalech is a case of a carbon tzibur, where the smicha is bebailim, because the smicha on the Sarah Mishtalech is implemented by the Kohen Gadol, and the Kohen Gadol, together with all of Klal Yisrael, will achieve kapara for these sins through the Sarah Mishtalech. So it's a kapara bebailim, and therefore it's included in the number 2 of the Hilchsa Gemirale, that there are 2 Karbanos Tzibur that require smicha. That's according to Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon Omer, no. Rabbi Shimon says the following. He's going to focus our attention on the Sarah Pnimi, not the Sarah Mishtalech. And he's going to argue that the Sarah Mishtalech is not mechaper on the Kohanim at all, and therefore it's not a smicha b'bailim. And how does he come to this conclusion? Kishem shedam soyer anasa b'fnim. And now we're talking about the Sarah Pnimi, right? There are 2 seirim. One is Mishtalech b'chutz, the other is Sarah Pnimi. And the dam of the Sarah Pnimi, which requires Hazaya in the Kodesh Kodashim, or at least in the Heichal for sure, right? Is Nasa b'fnim, is mechaper al Yisrael al tumas migdash v'kodashav. So with regard to non-Kohanim, which is called Yisrael, in a case of Tumas Migdash V'Kadashav, the kapara is achieved by the dam of the Soyer HaPnimi. But with regard to the Kohanim, Kach dam HaPar Mechaper Al Kodev Al Tumas Migdash V'Kadashav. The parallel to the dam HaSoyer for all of Klal Yisrael, in terms of Tumas Migdash V'Kadashav and its kapara, is the dam HaPar. And the dam HaPar for the Kohanim is going to be mechaper on Tumas Migdash V'Kadashav. So we already see, says Rabbi Shimon, that in the process of kapara, there's a fundamental distinction between Klal Yisrael and the Kohanim. Now we're going to apply that to the rest of the Averos, and therefore, kshem shevidui shall som shach Klal Yisrael b'shar Averos kach vidui shall par mechaper al Kohanim b'shar Averos. So just like we said that the dam hapar is mechaper on the Kohanim for Tumas Mikdash for Kadoshav, so too the dam hapar is given mechaper for all the Averos, shar Averos of the Kohanim. In the case of Shar Yisrael, the rest of the Jewish nation, the Kohanim, the Levim and the Israelim, then we're going to make the following distinction. With regard to Tumas Mikdash Kadoshav, it's going to be the Dam HaSoyer, meaning the Soyer Pnimi. With regard to all the other Averos, it's going to be the Soyer Mishtaleach. With regard to the Kohanim, the Dam of the Par is going to achieve Kapara for Tumas Mikdash Kadoshav and for Shar Averos. The only problem is Rabbi Yehuda, at the beginning of this brisa, quoted a pasuk which said, Kohanim im kol kahal Yisrael. So we see that the Torah itself did equate Kohanim with Klal Yisrael. According to Reb Shimon, how do you understand that pasuk? In fact, the Gemara of Reb Shimon of Vadai Hushvu, in Hushvu, to Bnei Kaparaninu. Yeah, the Torah is equating the Kohanim with Klal Yisrael as far as Kapara, but Miyu kol chad v'chad mechaper v'nafshe. The Kohanim have their own Kapara through the Par, and the non-Kohanim have the Kapara through either the Dam HaSora Pnimi in the case of Kedushas of Tumas Mikdash Kodesh, or the Dam of, or the Sora Mishtalech in the case of Shar Averos. And now the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav, Yisrael mechapri b'dam Sora nasa b'fnim, v'Kohanim v'Par shel Aaron. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda agrees to Rabbi Shimon that there is a fundamental distinction between Kohanim and Yisrael as far as Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosha, because Klal Yisrael, the non-Kohanim, achieve their kapara for Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosha through the Dam Soyer Anasa B'fnim, meaning the Soyer Pnimi. The Kohanim, on the other hand, will receive their kapara for Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosha through the Par of the Kohen Gadol. B'shar Averos, however, once we leave the realm of Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosha according to Rabbi Yehuda, then Elu v'Elu Mechapri b'Vidui Sar Mishtalech, they're all equally included in the Vidui and the Kapara of the Sar Mishtalech. And therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, when we're talking about Smicha b'Bailim on a Korban Tzibur, we can certainly include the Sar Mishtalech. But Rabbi Shimon, B'shar Averos Nami Kohanim b'Vidui de Par Miskaprim. According to Rabbi Shimon, we said that the Par of the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur is Mechaper not only for Tumas Mikdash v'Kadosha, for both Kohanim and non-Kohanim, but also with regard to Kohanim for Shar Averos. And therefore the Kohanim themselves did not achieve Kapara through the Sar Mishtalech according to Reb Shimon, and therefore the Vidui of the Sar Mishtalech has nothing to do with our Hilchas HaGemiri of the two cases of a Korban Tzibur which requires Smicha, because we're talking about Smicha b'Bailim. And in the case of the Sar Mishtalech, the Kohen Gadol implements the Smicha, but he's not a Bailim because he doesn't achieve any kapara through the Sar Mishtaleh. Kiriktani. Now this, I believe, let me just double check this. Right. This is a Mishnah at the beginning of Maseches Shavuos. Echad Yisrael v'echad Kohen v'echad Kohen Moshiach. right? This is the shita of Rabbi Yehuda that all of Klal Yisrael are equal in the kapara through the Sarah Mishtaleach. Ma ben Yisrael l'Kohen Kol Mashiach. What's the difference between Klal Yisrael and the Kohen? Eladam hapar mechaper al kohenim al tumas mikdash v'kadoshov. Whereas the dam of the Sarah Pnimi is mechaper. Just 1 second, let me get that straight. Dam hapar. Oh, yeah. So here with Tumas Mikdash Kadosh, we, even according to Rabbi Yehuda, we have a distinction between Kohanim and the rest of Klal Yisrael. So the rest of Klal Yisrael will achieve their kapara through the Dam Hasoyer Hapnimi, whereas the Kohanim will achieve their kapara through the Dam of the Par of the Kohen Gadol. Reb Shimon Omer, Shem Shedam Hasoyer Naseh Bifnim Mechaper al Yisrael. Just like we said that with regard to Tumas, Migdash, v'Kadoshav, there's a distinction between Klal Yisrael and the Kohen, because Klal Yisrael will achieve their kapar for Tumas, Migdash, v'Kadoshav with the Sarah Pnimi, whereas Kach Dama Par Mechapel Kohenim will achieve their kapara for Tumas, Migdash, v'Kadoshav with the Par. Is therefore also, says Reb Shimon, we're going to have a distinction with regard to Sharaveros. Kach. Kishem Shavidi Shel Sarv Shavachapal Yisrael. Right, for Shara Veros, the kapara for Klal Yisrael would be achieved through the Soya Mishtaleach, is Kach Viduyev Shel Par, and the Vidya of the Par, which we said is Mechaper for what? For Tumas Mikdash Kadosha for the Kohanim, is also Mechaper for the Kohanim for Shara Veros. Tana Rabbana, we learned in a brisa, V'samchu Ziknei Ha'edos Yedem Al Rosh HaPar. Now we're talking about the parsha of Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, and the word par over here, Rosh Par, is totally superfluous because the Torah already mentioned the par earlier. Is therefore, says the brisa, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, if I'm not mistaken, let me just double check. Can't turn it. Yeah, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, that what is the word Rosh Par come to exclude? Parton smicha, the ain't seiri avodas kolcham to unim smicha. And it sounds like at the face value that according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's no smicha whatsoever on the on the soyer of avodas Yom Kippurim, of avodas kolcham. Reb Shimon Omer, Reb Shimon says, Parton smicha bizkenim. The question here is who's going to do the smicha on the soyer of avodas kolchavim. In the case of Par Helim Dover Shel Tzibur, it's going to be the zkenim, right? Because it was the Sanhedrin that issued the erroneous psak. But in the case of Seirei Avodas Kolchavim, it's not going to be the Zkedim, it'll be Aaron, but rather it's going to be the Kohen. So according to Reb Shimon, in the case of Soyer of Avodas Kolchavim, the Kohanim are going to do the Smicha. And that apparently is considered Smicha B'Bailan. Even though the Kohanim did not violate the prohibition against idolatry. So that we're going to have to take up. So Gemara asks, I have another brisa that seems to contradict this one. And again, I'm just anticipating what's coming down the line. This first brisa, as we'll soon see, is not a reliable brisa because, how could the smicha on the Sarah Avodas Kolchavim be implemented by Aaron HaKohen when it's not Bailan? Anyway, so here's the second brisa with regard to the parsha of Sa'ir Hamishtaleh. So Lazazel, it says Hachai. The pasuk says, let's just see if we could read the pasuk here. V'samach aron shtei yodov al rosh hasoyer hachai. And apparently the word hachai is superfluous. Obviously, we were referring to the live goat. That's the whole parsha there. Hachai ton smich vein soyer. Siri avodas kolcham tunim smicha divrei Rabbi Yehuda, which again seems to indicate that there's no smicha in the Sar avodas kolchavim. Rabbi Shimon Omer chai ton smicha be Aaron. So with regard to the Sar Mishtalech, the smicha is implemented by Aaron, and now the extra word achai is coming lafuke to exclude seirei avodas kolchavim. That now the smicha on the Sarah Avodas Kochavim has to be implemented by the Bailim. And who is the Bailim in this case? It's going to be the Zkanim who issued the erroneous psak allowing the people to worship Avodah Zarah. Just want to see what time it is. Okay, we still have 10 minutes.